We'll call the meeting to order, and I know members have been together pretty near every evening and day this week, so we're seeing lots of each other. The hearing this morning is pursuant to Standing Orders 110 and 111, order in council appointment Annetta Seaman to the position of Director of the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, and was referred to committee on Thursday, March 22nd of this year. And we have Ms. Seaman with us this morning. Before I start, Ms. Seaman, we did send out a note to members because we haven't, I don't believe as a committee in this Parliament we have went through order and council appointments. And I just want to remind people what was in that note. There's certain rules pertaining to the examination of order and council appointment. Committees are limited to examining the individual's qualifications and performance to perform the duties of the office sought. This means that I, as chair, could interrupt the questioning of members if they deal with matters irrelevant to the committee's inquiry, for instance, political affiliation, contributions to political parties, and the nature of the nomination process. Any question, however, may be permitted if it can be shown that it relates directly to the appointee's ability to perform the duties of the office. So welcome, Ms. Seaman, and that's what we're here to go through the ability to perform the duties of the office, and I believe you have an opening statement, and again, welcome. The floor is yours.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to be here today to answer questions in relation to my appointment as Director and Chief Executive Officer of Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada. I'd like to begin by saying how truly honoured I am to have been appointed to lead FINTRAC, an organization that plays such a vital role in protecting Canadians and the integrity of the financial system. Lorsque j'ai servi à titre de première vice-présidente de l'agence,
when I served as the Executive Vice President of the Canada Border Services Agency, I saw firsthand the value of FINTRAC's financial intelligence and the results the centre achieves for Canadians. The clearest example of these results can be found with Project Protect, where the centre's financial intelligence has been critical to helping police rescue dozens of young Canadian women from the most horrifying conditions imaginable. Mr. Chairman, these types of results would not be possible without the dedicated efforts of thousands of businesses across the country that work with us to protect Canada's financial system and that provide us with the information we need to produce financial intelligence for Canada's police, law enforcement, and national security agencies.
Businesses to ensure they understand and are able to comply with the obligations under the Act. I do sincerely believe that they want to comply and they want to help protect Canada and Canada's financial system. So it is our job to ensure that they have the knowledge and the tools to establish effective compliance programs. With this type of support, I'm convinced that compliance rates will continue to improve and we will find ways to make the regime even stronger and more effective. As I follow your review of the Act, there seems to be a solid understanding of the importance of Canada's anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing regime and the results that it achieves for Canadians. Going forward, we are committed to looking more closely at the what and the how, and to engage businesses transparently and with an open mind to find even better ways of running our programs. This does include reviewing the burden facing businesses and with a priority for us that we do work with them. In my time as Associate Deputy Minister at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and Canadian Heritage, I worked collaboratively with a variety of stakeholders to address the issues and enhance programs and program delivery. I know the real benefit of working and listening to all perspectives and being open to change. Mr. Chair, FINTRAC is at a critical moment in its evolution. With this committee's review of the Act, the implementation of our new analytics system, and the tremendous innovation that is taking place all around, including in the financial sector, collectively we are setting the course for the Centre for many years to come. I believe that my 27 years of experience in Canada's professional public service has prepared me very well to help navigate FINTRAC through the changes that lay ahead. As the Assistant Secretary of the Economic Sector at the Treasury Board Secretariat of Canada, I work very closely with Treasury Board ministers to find more efficient and effective ways of running government programs. I learned in this role that there is always a way to make programs better. FINTRAC is a strong organization with very strong and knowledgeable and dedicated staff, and I know we can make it even better. Au début de ma carrière, lorsque j'étais une analyste,
Early in my career as an analyst at Cognos, I gained valuable experience in the field of information technology and business intelligence tools. I've put this to good use throughout my career, and specifically as the Chief Information Officer and Assistant Deputy Minister of Systems at Service Canada, where I was delighted to play a key role in setting the vision, design, and implementation of the Service Canada initiative. It has certainly had a significant impact on the quality of service that Canadians receive from their federal government. This experience will be helpful as we work with businesses to enhance our program.
Public servant came when I was responsible for running the Old Age Security Program and the Canada Pension Plan as a Senior Director General at Social Development Canada. Specifically, when we looked at the process for seniors to access a guaranteed income supplement, basically we saw that it involved several different application forms, very complex application forms, that resulted in a number of seniors not even knowing that they were eligible for the benefit. And when they did know they were eligible, they did not know how to complete the application form to actually access the benefits. With the help of our public service experts, we built a new process that not only was tailored to meet the needs of our citizens, but also made it much simpler. With that work, one letter was sent to seniors based on their income statement from the tax assessment to proactively inform them that they were eligible for the supplement. With this, we were able to provide benefits and reach an additional 200,000 low-income seniors who did require the benefit in a very simple and efficient manner. This process is still in use today. Mr. Chair, I am pleased to provide more detail on my experience, but I would like to conclude by saying, as a Canadian who immigrated to Canada at a very young age of 5, I am humbled, truly humbled to be here. And to have the opportunity to serve Canadians in what is recognized internationally as the best public service in the world. In fact, I chose to make the public service my career in order that I may serve my country, the country that welcomed me and my family and has provided so much to us. It is, as you can see, I am a very proud public servant, but I am also a very proud Canadian. And in every department and every agency in which I've worked, I have seen the same demonstrated in my colleagues and the commitment to excellence. They listen, they learn, they always look to improve, and they rise to the challenge to both protect and ensure the economic prosperity and the prosperity in general of Canada and Canadians. This is exactly what I've seen at FINTRAC over the past 2 months that I've been there, and I am blessed to join this team. But I have felt blessed, I'll be honest with you, to serve Canada and Canadians in every single public service job that I've ever had. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would be happy to answer questions. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Seaman. And I don't believe we're going with the regular round. We will go to those who have questions. I might say, and I expect it's the same for all MPs, on the point you made on seniors not knowing they're eligible for benefits. It always amazes me when people come into the office and they don't know they are entitled to certain benefits, and that happens in a lot of our offices. So that was one of the better moves that a government has made, in my view, giving them notice. But then there's others that don't file their taxes, so they don't know either. We run into that too. So who wants to start? Mr. Dussault and then Mr. Ellis.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Seaman. Thank you for being here today, and congratulations on your appointment. My main question is this. I'd like to learn something about your experience with organized crime. and criminal activity in general. With regard to the application of the Act and knowledge of how organized crime operates. We know that there's a great deal of money laundering. I'd like to hear your perspective so that we gain an understanding of how well their processes are understood. Thank you for the question. I was the first vice president of the CBSA at the time. Well, it's the second largest law enforcement organization in the federal government. I had the pleasure, well, I don't know if I should say pleasure, but I did work very closely with intelligence. I learned a great deal about how criminal law enforcement works. We saw a great deal of their activities at CBSA, and we were the first line of defense in Canada against organized crime. When I was with the CBSA, I was a member of a DM committee responsible for national security as well at that time. But when I was the senior vice president, I worked with FINTRAC, and I saw the work that FINTRAC did and the importance of the intelligence that they.
Et à ce moment, j'étais très.
I was extremely interested, and I knew that my work with security and my work with regulations was very important, as was the administration of regulations and IT systems and intelligence systems. I knew that it was a good place for me to go. FINTRAC, that is.
So, Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Seaman. I certainly appreciate your presentation today in regards to your background and certainly welcome you to this committee and wish you the best as you try to work on behalf of all Canadians. In regard to our study right now on our statutory review of the anti-money laundering and proceeds of crime and anti-terrorist funding review, we've come across a number of different sentiments. We had the Minister of the Crown from British Columbia, David Eby, come here, and he portrayed FINTRAC in, while you certainly have said you've had the honor and pleasure of working with many people, some of the best being at FINTRAC, he had a much different view. Are you aware of his comments that he made about FINTRAC at this committee?
I am actually. We met with Mr. Eby as well, and when he did come to Ottawa, and we had a very constructive and very productive meeting. As you know, the role of FINTRAC is twofold. One is to help businesses comply with the Act so that we get the information that we can actually then provide intelligence to law enforcement organizations so that they can then do their work in terms of enforcement. At that meeting, we agreed and spoke about how we can work better together, how our information can be accessed, and the work that we have been doing. We also explained to Mr. Eby that we have increased, both in the real estate sector as well as casinos, some of our assessment activity. In fact, we've increased our assessments of the real estate agents significantly over the past few years, to the point that 30% of all of our assessments are in the real estate sector. And a number of those are also in Vancouver, as well as Toronto and other areas of the country. Moreover, we've developed a casino forum where we provided information, and we're doing a lot of outreach as well to explain to people the importance of that information so that we can get it. With the casino forum that we've done, where we had both provincial administrators of regulators of casinos, as well as casino owners and people that actually worked at the casino, we were able to provide enough information where we did actually see an improvement in the number of suspicious transaction reports and the number. So both quality and quantity of both suspicious transaction reports, both in the real estate sector and in casinos. And once we get those, we create actionable intelligence for law enforcement to then take it to the next round. So we have been working, and we've agreed to continue to work collaboratively.
Okay, so
I want to cut off discussion, but really this line of questioning is getting into the second part of our session. And what I would do is invite the rest of officials up with FINTRAC. Is there any more questions on the ability to do the job or the background of Ms. Seaman that people want to ask? And I'm not sure even whether all FINTRAC officials that are on a witness, I believe they're all here. Okay. Anyway, anything related specifically to the appointment process that we want to ask Ms. Seaman at this time, and then we can get into, and you're here as a witness, I believe, as well. Really, because it'd be better to have this information as evidence in our proceeds of crime money laundering study than on the order and council appointment process. Okay, you got a question?
well,
here?
no, I would just suggest, Mr. Chair, that is a good suggestion, and perhaps we might get unanimous consent from the committee to include the last tail bit of testimony, so that we can include that in our money laundering
I think
review.
that's fine. If people agreed. Any more questions on the qualifications? Mr. Sabara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and bienvenue, Madame Seaman. I was wondering if you can just briefly touch upon your past experience in terms of the size of the bureaucracy and the processes versus what you've now come to at FINTRAC, and how the two are relatable or not.
Actually, this is one of the smallest groups in terms of that I've led in a long time. Before, as Assistant Deputy Minister, even at Social Development Canada or ESDC, it's changed names so many times. As the Chief Information Officer there, I led an organization of over 3,000 employees and a budget of about $30 billion at the time. And at Canada Pension Plan or Old Age Security, we administered over $70 billion a year in benefits to Canadians. As the Associate Deputy Minister at Canadian Heritage, which was my first Associate Deputy Minister appointment, it was an organization of over 1,600 people. It was actually 1,800, but with the DRAP, it was 1,600, and managed a number of programs and a budget also in the billions. Also a large portfolio organization in terms of arm's length agencies. At Agriculture and Agri-Food as associate as well, I was, as associate, we led an organization of over 6,000 employees and billions of dollars of benefits as well. The at Agriculture and at Canadian Heritage, the job was actually leading arm's length organizations. So we provided the policy advice, we provided some of the regulatory guidance and the policy guidance to them, but the arm's length. When I was at the Canada Border Services Agency, it is an organization of 12,000 employees and about $1.8 billion in terms of, and mostly operational in terms of services at the border. There I was an agency that was arm's length from the government. So I've had both the opportunity to be the policy lead as well as an agent that is arm's length from government. And I think it has actually served me quite well. So based on my experience in intelligence and public safety at CBSA, but also the regulatory frameworks that I've been able to put into place, whether it be at Agriculture, at Canadian Heritage, or at ESDC, and my IT background, I believe that I've just been very well, it's almost my training for this position has just been very, very well established.
That is wonderful to hear, because I take it you're obviously quite familiar. I'm just going to use the word change management in respect that if what you encounter at FINTRAC, if there needs to be additional changes or anything like that, that we're confident that we have someone in place, and from what it sounds like, most certainly so, to handle that.
In every single one of my jobs, there was a very large change management. As I mentioned, at Canadian Heritage, we had to manage a workforce reduction of 30% and a major cut in our budget. And that obviously included a lot of change management. About a year and a half after that, we had the Public Service Employee Survey. We had one of the best results in the Employee Public Service Survey, even with all of those cuts. At Guaranteed Income Supplement, for example, that was a very, very major change. It basically was taking a look and saying, instead of Canadians having to come to government and apply in what was literally 8 different application forms and about 10 pages, about 8 font, very hard to read, and to say we can do better, we can actually change it using the way the regulations and the legislation is to find a way where we can reach them. And working with our CRA colleagues, and with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, we found a way to be able to do that. So, and it required quite a bit of change because it totally changed how we actually delivered. I must say, even in the 2 months that I've been at FINTRAC, it is an organization that's used to change, that embodies and enjoys change. And with the advancements in technology, we must change. We must, first of all, harness those advancements so that we can find better ways to work with our colleagues and our reporting entities. But we also need to take a look at those changes in technology because they now allow bad actors to have new methods in order to abuse our system. And so we will have to be constantly on top of all of that change. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dussault?
C'est une question.
I have a supplementary question on your experience on managing the regulatory framework on fines and penalties imposed. Can that experience help you in the current process to review the fines and penalty system that was deemed to be too subjective by the courts? Does your past experience in Social Development Canada, for example, or the CBSA, do you feel that those regulatory frameworks governing fines and penalties were more satisfactory and would meet the criteria of the courts of justice? Thank you for that question. It's true that my experience at CBSA is useful. At the agency, we established certainly a great many administrative penalties. I have a lot of experience with that and with the appeals process as well. But when I was associate ADM at Agriculture and Agri-Food, I had a great deal of experience. And also as ADM at Agriculture and Agri-Food, I gained a great deal of experience with implementing policy and frameworks and regulatory frameworks. I worked a great deal with the Food Inspection Agency, and they also have an excellent process for administrative penalties. I believe that experience, as well as experience with the FINTRAC team, has meant that we'll have an excellent administrative penalties program in the near future. I think it'll be the best in the world.
Okay, with that, hearing no further questions on the order and council appointment, we'll ask the remainder of the witnesses from FINTRAC to come forward. Mr. McKillop, Deputy Director of Operations, to join Madam Seaman, and Mr. Boudre, Assistant Director, Collaboration, Development and Research Sector. And on this discussion, we will move towards the Finance Committee's statutory review of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering and Terrorism Financing Act. So I'm not sure, and thank you for your appearing before the committee in the order and council appointment, Ms. Seaman. Does anybody have an opening statement, or are we going to questions? No opening statement?
We're good to go with questions.
Do it with questions. Okay. Do we have a list? Mm-hmm. All right. Welcome. And I think we've met with FINTRAC previously in camera, I believe. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. And for some appearing again. I want to refer to the CBC story on April 5th, 2018, and one of the subheadings is actually the report tabled in Parliament calls banks good citizens. The internal report tells a different story. In this article, it goes through significant poor showing findings of non-compliance through banks, the real estate sector, and money services sector such as payday loans. When members of FINTRAC officials appeared before this committee before, why were these concerns not disclosed to this committee in terms of areas of study that during this review that this committee should be studying, or recommendations that should be coming through information that FINTRAC had or provided to the minister and the department?
I can start, and Barry, if...
Okay, Mr. McKillop, and then we'll go to Ms. Seaman.
Okay, you go ahead, Dan. You go.
Well, whichever way you want
It's
it.
okay, don't worry.
You guys can decide.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The part of what we do in terms of at FINTRAC, when we do our compliance assessments, when we go out and do exams of our entities, those findings themselves in terms of what we find within any entity is stuff that is not made public. We don't publicly release the findings of our entities. Our law does not allow that. In terms of the discussions that we've had here, we have indicated that there's always room to improve in any compliance assessment that we do on any entity. When we look at the reference to significant versus limited versus very significant, you're right that there were significant findings and deficiencies found in many of the exams that we do. And the way it was set up initially, it was more of an audit approach. So you're sort of, initially we were counting deficiencies. So if you missed an item on a report, it would be a deficiency. And when you count up a number of minor deficiencies, you fall into what would be considered a significant area for attention, and we work with the entities to address those areas of attention. The significant difficulties, there were no very significant difficulties in the banks that we've examined, and in areas where there were historically found significant difficulties or very significant deficiencies, we've addressed that either through a number of different applications that we use and a number of different enforcement actions that we can take. So we've worked either directly, we've done outreach, we have action plans, we have follow-up examinations, we have obviously we have AMPS, and we have as well NCDs, which are non-compliance disclosures that we provide to the police if there are issues. So when we look at the reporting, historically it was an audit approach. We've now moved, and we have been moving over the last couple of years to look at an assessment approach. So while there may be deficiencies...
To cut you off, but I do have limited time. And so the concern that I'm trying to express is that even if there are minor deficiencies that then total to significant deficiencies, the report that was tabled, the public report, implies that compliance is great, that banks are doing well, there are no concerns. If there are several, even if they're minor deficiencies, shouldn't this committee at some point be told, here's an area, they're minor, but here's an area that is you know, the banks are having trouble with. Here is, you know, why does one public report, you know, demonstrate one thing, and an internal report that had to be accessed through the media, through freedom of information, paints a different story. And at the very same time this committee is going through this review, including an in-camera meeting with FINTRAC officials, that any privacy issues could have at least been raised. So I understand that you don't release the findings, but if you have, for example, a 75% non-compliance rate in the real estate sector, at what point should that be raised to this committee as an area of concern that our review should look at?
To all, we have to be careful on what was said in an in-camera meeting is still held in camera.
Anything, Mr. Chair? that
No,
was-
it wasn't.
Okay.
I'm just, you didn't say
Warning.
anything, just a warning of in-camera meetings. It's one of the difficulties. What happens in camera remains in camera. Who's taking it? Go ahead, Steve.
Actually, I thank you for the question. I looked at the same thing. Quite honestly, the two reports put together provide the minister a full picture of what is happening. They both highlighted that enhancements in reporting had happened in all sectors, and that is true, and that is what has happened. As Mr. McKillop has said, the way we were doing audits, and in 2017 we moved to an assessment model, so you will see a difference. And the way we were doing audits is when we would go into a bank, and it could be a minor deficiency. For example, you don't have the address completely in. You've got something, but I don't have everything. It still allows us to do the work that we need to do, but it's a minor deficiency. Reporting entities, especially banks that have millions, billions of transactions, if they have actually had that a number of times, the result of a number of issues in that one field would result in a major deficiency. I do believe that the definition, the way it currently is in terms of major deficiency, can be clarified a little bit further, because a lot of minor doesn't always mean that it's a major, because the banks can fix that quite quickly through a system fix, for example. And in our new work, as we move from an audit, and as Mr. McKillop said, the more we do audits, every single time we look at a file, if it's the exact same issue that we have found, we will add it every time, and then the number, because it's so many, becomes a major. As we move to an assessment model, we actually are looking more at the impact, which is more outcomes-based, and more looking at what is the impact of not having this information. If it is severe, it will be very significant. If it is a field that is missing that actually still allows us to do the job, it won't be identified as very significant. So we're in the process of looking at those definitions to be a little bit more clear and transparent in what they really mean. But they do have a similar picture in terms of, and we are pleased that our reporting entities are improving. We're getting more suspicious transaction reporting in all of our sectors. We've actually received more. The quality is improving. Can we do better? Absolutely. Will we do better? Absolutely. But they are moving in the right direction. Also, a number of new obligations were introduced last year, and always with new obligations, as they're preparing their systems, there could be deficiencies that are found.
Okay, there'll be more rounds. Mr. Elvis.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the Director. Director, as you have fresh eyes on the organization and you've seen other organizations and whatnot, I'd like to ask you a few questions about FINTRAC. First of all, Mr. McKillop had mentioned that FINTRAC is legislated to report certain things and to not obviously report other things because they're not given permission. You're not given permission to do so. Do you think that, because we are looking at possible recommendations to the government, that in order for you to build better trust in the institution of FINTRAC, better awareness of the responsibilities, that this committee can make recommendations that would allow more information to be made public?
I actually look forward to your recommendations. At 2 months on the job, I would be very reluctant to start identifying areas to improve. However, I must say that when we work, and that was the first thing I was actually told, you can't do this, you can't do that, because it's actually against the legislation. So I was briefed very quickly in terms of what we can't do. One of the things, for example, and I've seen the committee raise it, is on our results. Many times we can't speak of what we have given to law enforcement organizations. However, when they acknowledge our support, then you can actually see that we had provided support. There are benefits, there are pros and cons to that, and I think it's a very appropriate question for the committee to study, and quite honestly, I look forward to seeing your recommendations, because I think there's a number of variables that have to be looked at before one comes up with a resolution to that.
So as decision makers, policymakers grapple with issues about or provincially regulated space in terms of real estate transaction, mortgages, private mortgages, etc., there's a lot of unknowns. We did a study basically in the real estate markets of Canada last year, and it was a good report. But one of the things we heard is that CMHC, OSFI doesn't have the information that FINTRAC may have on purchases of homes with cash and whatnot. I think that there could be some aggregated data that may be able to provide policy makers as well as the public greater information, but you are legislated not to violate anyone's privacy. Do you believe that this committee could make recommendations that would allow greater information to be shared in those terms with policymakers on an aggregated basis where there would be no compromise of privacy? Do you think that that would help your institution to be part of the solution when it comes to these challenging situations?
I must say, I think we are already part of the solution. As I've mentioned, we've seen a number. I've seen since I've been here, almost on a weekly basis, a number of acknowledgments from law enforcement in terms of saying how our information has helped them. However, to your point, I think it is very much a balance of respecting Canadians, what Canadians expect out of us in terms of respecting their privacy rights, but also the Charter of Rights in terms of what we collect, but also having sufficient information to be able to administer our anti-money laundering and our anti-terrorist financing regime. So from that perspective, I think there is a sweet spot that we need to find. And I do feel that we need to keep looking at that in terms of sharing information amongst other federal governments and that. We do share currently within the legislation in certain areas. And again, I believe we need to take a look at who shares what. Part of the reason FINTRAC was created is because a lot of these transactions that we do get may not be required for disclosures. And so it is important that we protect that information. It is important that we guard that. And the Office of the Privacy Commissioner comes every 2 years. We're the only federal government agency that actually has that review every 2 years. And I think it's important that we keep and maintain that for public trust. Always the more information you have, the better you can do, but we really do also must maintain the Charter of Rights and public trust.
No, and I agree with that. I think that what you mentioned to be a bit of a sweet spot where there's information that, as policymakers want to know, that only FINTRAC may have access to, would be helped to collate that in a format that doesn't compromise anyone's personal information. I'd like to just ask, because this was raised and actually answered by one of your officials, when I asked about the administrative burden, because there is a burden, and it's important work that you do, but many industries feel that the proportionality of filing papers, etc., can be quite onerous, and your agency does not track administrative burden. I'm all for public safety, and I'm all for making sure you have the resources you need to do your job. But I also think that there seems to be an emphasis in your organization where it's only about being effective and not being efficient and working with groups, whether it be banks, but particularly small credit unions that I've heard of, that where the proportionality of the reporting is quite onerous.
And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, and as my experience has proven, at least at Service Canada, it is about working with the banks. It is about service. It is about about smaller reporting entities. It's not just the banking sector. Burden is important to us at the center. So when you talk about the effectiveness is very important, but the efficiency is just as important. And if it's extremely burdensome, we might not get the quality or the number or the volume that we need. If we can actually, and that's why I committed in my opening remarks, we need to work with our reporting entities to find out what is it that we can do. How is it, whether it be technologically, finding different ways of getting the data in terms of receiving it, but also how is it that we can work with them in terms of our requirements? Is the data required? Where is it required? How is it required? That was what I meant when I said the what and how is what we really need to focus on. And I've met with the Canadian Banking Association. I've been to at least one of our regions and met with a number of chief money laundering CAMLOs, liaison officers in banks. And that is part of the conversation that we're trying to have. Let's work together in order to find out what is the sweet spot. You mentioned the smaller reporting entities. They also have fewer reports. Over 91% of our responses come from the banking sector. So
And
they do
Madam-
have less of a burden.
And,
as well.
and I appreciate that, Madam Director, but at the same token, the proportionality is there. I have a small credit union that I've spoken to, and they've said that just on FinTrack alone, they are do over one full-time equivalent, and that's at a very small entity that has a high proportionality cost that gets put on it. And again, when we as a committee, we also see common reporting standards, FACTA, all these different measures that get thrown onto these agencies. It gets to be a bit much. So, Director, are you planning then to start measuring administrative compliance by industry? Because if you don't measure it, you cannot manage it.
I think it will be difficult to measure something that is at another location. I think we can talk about what is the burden in terms of what is the requirement, but I think we can focus on measuring, but we also need to focus on addressing it in terms of finding different ways. So we are talking to different reporting entities to find out what is the burden. I am starting to ask the question everywhere I go to explain what is the burden, where are you seeing it, and how is it that we can actually make it better. So that is something that we're looking at. In terms of measuring, some of our staff are starting to look at ways we might be able to measure, but it is not an easy way to measure in terms of what's happening
We're
outside of our
substantially
organization.
over on this round. We'll come back to another round, I'm sure. Mr. Dussault.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci encore à vous tous.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. My first question is on an issue that was raised and perhaps didn't receive enough attention. I don't know whether you've been asked about it at FinTrack when you were before the committee, but it's a question on ATMs. When the representative of the association, the ATM Association, whose name I forget, said that everything was fine, that there were no problems, that the media were drawing a very negative picture, but there was really nothing to be concerned about because the facts were positive. In your view, is that an area of concern, ATMs, with regard to money laundering? And what can we do? What sort of recommendations and suggestions can we make to address the issue, which many believe it does exist? Do you believe there's a problem? And if so, what can we do to tackle it? It's a good question. It's difficult to really know whether there's a problem because it's not being measured at the moment. There are no reports. There's nothing we're doing in that area. So from the information side, we're not sure. Anecdotally, there's no doubt that when we see ATMs in some areas, there is reason to believe that they could be used for illegal ends. But is there a problem? Probably. It's one way, like another, of laundering money. You can launder money using an ATM. There's no register as such that reports to us. We don't know who the owners are. We don't know what money is going into those machines or who's taking it out. So is that a way that, is it a method that could be used to launder money? Absolutely. Are there recommendations we can make? They're in the document published by the Department of Finance. It is indicated in there as an issue. Questions are raised. Is there a recommendation that could put an end to the use of ATMs in money laundering? I don't think so. It would be difficult. And I would invite you to be creative in seeking a solution. But then we come to the compliance issue. What can we do? And who is required to be in compliance? Is it the owner of the location where it is? Or is it the genuine owner? And what is that? It's a difficult question to analyze. they can be used to launder money, yes, but is it a huge issue? I don't know. I'll leave it up to you to establish whether you need to make a recommendation. Yes, it is difficult to establish how we might ensure what information would be provided to you and what entity would be subject to rules and regulations, who in that entire chain could be held responsible. On another question, which is related to the one by my colleague, do you have a mandate to educate, to help ensure compliance? What we heard from another witness is that they didn't even know that they needed to report to FINTRAC. So do you have, I believe it was a real estate broker. So do you have some sort of education function to ensure that organizations are aware of their obligations and don't overlook them, therefore? And we don't want them to learn months or years later that they should have reported things they didn't report, and then they're laid low by the penalties that ensue from their deficiency. Yes. Training and education are very important because all organizations who need to report to FINTRAC have to be aware of their obligations. That's part of our work. And we've started doing a great deal more outreach. And we've seen how that improved both the type and quality of reports that we get. We are an agency with 360 people. We're not huge. And there are many organizations who report to us. We work with a great many organizations like CREA and similar bodies to help educate members of these organizations on their obligations. But improvements can always be brought, and we have to work with everyone we can to make sure that education is done. Thank you.
Sur une autre question sur...
On another issue, something that was pointed out in the testimony, occasionally in banks there's a great deal of subjectivity in the kinds of suspect operations that are declared. A witness said that sometimes it's just because of the color or appearance of a person, or perhaps the person's conduct at the bank counter, that triggers a statement by the bank employee that a suspect operation or a suspect transaction has taken place. Do you see that? Do you believe that many declarations are subjective? It happens. It happens less and less. When FINTRAC was first set up, there were no guidelines or indicators or any of what we have now. But over the past 5 or 6 years or 7 years, we've seen fewer and fewer subjective reports from banks. So it's very rare now to have a suspect transaction reported which is in fact based on purely subjective criteria. It's always based on the transaction itself. We work with the organizations that declare these transactions. We train them on what is a suspect transaction. We give them indicators. We help them see trends that point to money laundering. So I would say that it's now extremely rare to have a suspect transaction declared which is not in compliance with the reporting requirements. And if we get such reports, we take them out of our system. And if we see a tendency by a particular organization who tends to misreport, if we get these subjective reports from reporting entities, then we work with them to make sure that they hold to the thresholds and reporting requirements. So yes, subjective reports are rare, but when they happen, we take them out of the system. And if we see a trend from a given entity, we talk to them about compliance. That, of course, is the information education side. And we tell them that their reports are unsatisfactory.
Point in terms of working with them to get better compliance. And on the questions raised by both the last two questioners, what we will get, say from a small credit union that's only got 6 employees, versus a bank in the next city that's got a whole department almost. There is a huge difference in burden to fill out the information for FINTRAC. But how do you work with them? Do you is it a matter of a phone call? Is it a matter of sending some people in to talk to the institution? What's that relationship like when it comes to say working with a small institution in a rural area? How do you do that? Is it a paper trail? Is it a phone call? Is it a visit? How do you develop that relationship?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We use just about every possible technique. Certainly, we have a very informative website, so there is a lot of information available on the website. If they're an existing credit union, so they're not new and they're not a new entity, there may be more specific outreach to ensure that they're aware of where to find the information they need. On the existing ones, we work very, very closely, and we've done webinars, we've done regional outreaches with credit unions in particular regions within Canada. We do information sessions. Personally, I have sat on a 2-hour webinar with credit unions across Canada to deal with and to address their questions and to talk to them about the burden of reporting, as well as the necessity and how they might ensure that what they're doing is what's required. What are the requirements? What's the guidance? How their credit unions may or may not be used for money laundering or terrorist financing, and what types of things that they may be able to look for and what's required in terms of a compliance program. So we do outreach. We do it specifically with them, and there are Canadian credit union associations, so we will work with associations and make sure that the information that we provide is provided down to the individual credit unions within that association. And we've done it regionally as well with regional credit associations. So we do have a lot of different techniques that we use. If we were to do an exam, and that's another opportunity, when we do a notification letter, there's always a written piece for a notification letter saying that we're coming in X amount of time to do an exam, and this is the scope and what we will look at. And then from there will be discussions usually between reception of that letter and the actual exam. Throughout the course of the exam, there are discussions at the exit interview. There are also discussions about what the findings were, what the challenges are that we see, how they may be corrected, what some of the mitigating factors may or may not be, what that particular entity is choosing to do or would like to do to address the issues. And then from there, we move on to whatever the findings letter is. So we use as many different ways to reach out to people as possible. We also have a 1-800 number. People do call in. They do ask questions. We do put out policy interpretations, and we do several policy interpretations. I think in 16-17, there's somewhere around 5,800 inquiries to FINTRAC. Obviously not all from credit unions, but we do respond to those. We respond directly. And when there are policy interpretations that affect, the question may be generated from one particular credit union, but if there's an impact across, not only will we put out the policy interpretation publicly, but we would also push it out as well directly to those in the sector who may be affected by that policy interpretation. And they're all on our website as well, but we will actively push out policy interpretation. We will push out any new guidance that we develop because we want all sectors to have access to that. So while we have a major reporters forum, we do other work as well.
Okay, Mr. Sabara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
Who's next over?
pull this up. My first question deals with, in the introductory remarks, Ms. Seaman, you mentioned on page 2, if I can just under the paragraph, working together to strengthen the regime. That second paragraph, the last sentence, where you say, going forward, we are committed to looking more closely at the what and the how, and to engaging businesses transparently and with an open mind to find even better ways of running our program. This includes reviewing the burden facing businesses, which is a priority for us. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Absolutely, and thank you for that. As I mentioned, we know what information we need, but we also need to take a look at the collectivity of information from all of our reporting entities and to ask the question, what exactly do we need from the various reporting entities? And how can we actually get it in a simpler way? For example, in the real estate sector, and you've spoken quite a bit about the burden on the real estate sector, the majority of information that we can get from the real estate sector will be suspicious transaction reports that will result in actionable work. In terms of large cash transaction, we will also get that information from the banking sector, from other sectors as well. So it's the question of how is it that we can work better with everybody and make those linkages so that we can find easier way, less burdensome ways for us to get the information. Also with the use of technology, when you look at blockchain, where people and most banking institutions are now moving into blockchain. In blockchain, you actually would have to go get the information. In our legislation, we cannot get the legislation; we must receive it. So, how is it that we can actually take advantage of the new technologies while still respecting the spirit of why that legislation was in there? You don't want us going in and taking whatever we want, but what kind of barriers can we put where we can get what we're entitled to, which then would reduce the burden on these people quite a bit as well? And how is it that even we can work with the smaller firms that don't have those big systems in place? That can we create an online capacity for them to just log in and be able to do something very simply? Can we work with them to take advantage of some of those technologies? But it's only by talking to them and finding out exactly what is it that you find the most burdensome, what is it that we can do to help you, and then to put together an action plan to deal with that. But it is a priority, and we are positive the minute we deal with that, the quality and the quantity of reports will actually improve.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I do want to switch gears a little bit. You know, we all read the CBC article on Ottawa's secret report on money laundering points finger at Canadian banks, and we're all familiar when that came out. There was something in here that I wanted to ask, and maybe yourself or your officials want to address it. Just the change that took place in FINTRAC in 2016, 2017, and I'll read it verbatim from here so I make sure I get that correct. The agency abandoned its technical audits of banks and others in favor of broader assessments of the overall effectiveness in complying with their legal obligations. And obviously it goes on that you can't compare now apples and apples because we're not comparing apples and apples anymore. But that change, was that a good change? And I say that not to, like it's easy to say it was a good change, but has it been an effective change? Has it improved the information that's flowing back back to FINTRAC in terms of the regime's overall effectiveness and in terms of what FINTRAC does?
And I can speak, and I'll let Barry jump in after, but in terms of the move from an audit approach to an assessment approach, that is a move that is extremely important. As Barry mentioned, and I believe I might have mentioned, by moving to an assessment approach, we're still doing a review and an assessment of the organizations. The difference is, in an audit approach, as we found a minor deficiency, we would keep looking at that same minor deficiency and over again. In an assessment, we look at the deficiencies, we identify the impact of these deficiencies, we work more with entities in a more collaborative way in terms of saying, this is what we require, and we will take that impact and then we will assess how that is helping us or hindering us from being able to do our work. So from an audit to an assessment approach, it is the smart way to work.
It's almost like looking at, when you're looking at accounting, you're using rules versus principles.
Absolutely. That's
right?
actually a very good way to put it.
That's the comparison.
And outcomes. And outcomes. It doesn't matter if we have 100 very minor deficiencies that really don't have an effect on the outcome, but I might have one deficiency that has an effect on the outcome. So therefore, I need to focus on the one that is important, not the 100 that actually I can just ask them to fix very easily and they can do it. So we will still identify those, but we will focus on the principle and the outcomes.
Thank you. My daughter has a little bit more.
You got time for one more.
Okay, and just with regards, because you mentioned it at the beginning, we've obviously heard a lot on blockchain technology, and I don't really know what it is in a lot of way. I've heard a lot about it, I just haven't been exposed to it and everything. But it seems like what's happening in this world, things are changing with regards to blockchain. Even the energy requirements for Bitcoin is massive. You want to talk about what's going to drive energy growth? Wow. But in terms of blockchains within our financial institutions and within FINTRAC's purview, do you have the resources? Is the legislation appropriate for this changing technology that you're guided under?
I think it is appropriate to look at, and in the guidance document and that Finance has put out, it is appropriate to take a look at what do we need to deal with the new technologies, whether it be cryptocurrency, whether it be blockchain, in terms of looking at, and I'm not convinced that means there's a change in legislation. I just think we need to understand it and review it to make sure that we can actually take advantage both of those technologies, but also understand the information that these technologies and the capacity that it actually gives bad actors to potentially abuse the system as well. So it's sort of a two-sided coin. We want to take advantage of it to be able to work more efficiently with our reporting entities, but we also are very aware that some of this new technology also allows bad actors to be able to abuse our system. So we need to work very closely on that. In terms of the knowledge, we have incredibly dedicated staff who are quite knowledgeable in cryptocurrencies. As a matter of fact, we're leading through the Egmont Group a study paper on the impact of virtual currencies that we are putting forward internationally. So we are very aware of the issues, and we work closely with our colleagues at the Department of Finance to say how can we move into that area in a very measured and appropriate manner.
Okay, thank you all. Mr. Albus.
I'd like to continue to talk about the administrative burden. Obviously, you're a compliance agency, so you have a set of marching orders, so to speak, delegated to you legislatively, and so you go and you seek to do that. Now, in the United States, on every piece of paperwork you deal with the government, the bottom right-hand corner, it'll actually say how much time it takes to fill out the form on average. And that's one way of assessing the amount of time that an entrepreneur or someone might take to report. Here, closer to home, we have the Red Tape Reduction Act. And obviously, your role is a little bit differently because not quite the same as a regulator, but even to be taking in an industry by industry average of what the compliance costs are and then setting reasonable goals. Now, do you feel under the current framework that you have, Director, that you can start to measure those compliance costs, or is this something that should be spelled out by Parliament legislatively so that you can start to take a look at the proportionality on your administrative burden?
Noted. And I guess the question in terms of does this require legislation to do it, I believe we've got all the capacity to be able to do it, and whether in terms of how we do it, whether legislation is put forward or whether we are asked to do it and we do it and we find a way to do it, there's one thing about looking at the data but making sure that it's actually telling you the right thing. So that would be my concern, making sure we're getting the right information. But we will have to, at some point, take a look at, and as I mentioned, my goal is to work with all reporting entities to identify and understand that reporting burden. If there is a way to measure it, if there is a way to be able to, and you've given me a number of ideas in terms of how to look at it, we will look at it. Does it require legislation for us to look at it? No, it just requires us to actually find a way.
I sincerely appreciate hearing that because, again, this is one of those things where I know you have a very difficult job to do, and there's lots of information transactions coming in on a regular basis. But I am glad to see that you're interested in saying, okay, is how we are doing this not just effective but efficient? But again, Treasury Board Secretariat, for example, the Red Tape Reduction Act, the Small Business Lens, there are codified systems within government. I would hope that you would tap into that because there's a lot of good work that has been done to reduce the administrative burden on a systemic basis, industry by industry. And I would hope you'd look at that because, again, I'm sure there are some industries, for example, we've heard from jewelers and whatnot who oftentimes they are small family operations. And again, the temptation to sell a pair of earrings each separately for $5,000 so that they don't have to actually report the $10,000 threshold level, to me would be something that some entrepreneurs may look at just because they don't want to have to fill out that extra form. And now, to me, that seems to, by putting those incentives in that way, seems to, skirt compliance. And you mentioned yourself earlier, Director, that in fact, if you can make the compliance easier, you'll actually see better results. So I would greatly encourage you to look at that. I also would encourage my colleagues, though, to look at perhaps making recommendations to make this, to make some sort of administrative compliance, at least an initial inventory should be done, but to find that efficiency, so at least we cap that administrative burden, particularly on some smaller industries.
Thank you for that. I would argue, though, that it cannot be a one-size-fits-all. There will be a different burden depending on the size, depending on the reporting entity, and that is why it'll be so critical to really work. So to put a goal before we've actually sat down with the industry and spoken to them, and truly understood what do you mean when you say administrative burden, could actually take us through the wrong door. And I totally agree with you, and that is why I believe strongly we have to work with the industry. We need to hear from them exactly what it is and how we can do it, and it will have to be tailored to the capacity of each industry. Thank you for that.
Thank you both. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation today. We heard a lot about FINTRAC and the whole regime over the last while, and one of the things that stood out for me was information sharing. And I read an article the other day where a bank was fined, but the bank was not identified. There was no information on what bank it was. So I would assume they're trying to create awareness and about the whole money laundering and everything involved in it would be something that would help us. But it seems like FINTRAC kind of wants to keep things under wraps, and I'm wondering why FINTRAC would protect a bank from public scrutiny, as was reported.
Thank you for that. First of all, I think the former director had come to the committee and spoken for his decision that he exercised under his discretion. The one thing I'd probably, though, say is under the legislation, the way it currently is a bank cannot be named until all proceedings have been completed, including any potential appeals process. So that is a question for the committee in terms of is that where it should be or not. However, both Finance Canada has also identified and committed, as well as our past director, that they will look at ways of being more transparent. I believe in transparency and openness wherever possible, so I'm very much looking forward both to your review, but also to the document, the discussion paper that was put out by Finance, which actually talks to the naming issue as well. But I am committed to ensuring we continue on that work with the administrative monetary penalty review as well, and being able to create the proper program that, as the regime puts, it's an administrative monetary penalty. It's intended to be not the first response, but the last response, or not the last response, but a response within the toolkit. But I am committed to being able to work with the committee as well as Finance Canada on the naming and what is the most appropriate method going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I'm going to assume the recommendations that were brought forward by Canadian Bankers Association indicated that they felt that the regime should be improved through greater collaboration, better communication, information sharing between governments, law enforcement, and financial institutions. And they talked about allowing financial institutions to share information amongst themselves. They also pointed out that it was hard to restrict a customer who they feel is high risk and provide that information to other banks. Maybe you could give us your view on that. Is that something that really needs to be improved, that maybe we need to make a recommendation in that area?
I've actually heard the same thing when I did meet the Banking Association as well as a number of other banks individually. As I mentioned originally in one of the comments that I made, there is a sweet spot in terms of protecting Canadians' privacy and the Charter of Rights and being able to share the information. Yes, obviously, if banks can share information amongst themselves, that would be information that would be well known, and it would actually help them. But I think we do have to weigh that against the Charter of Rights. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Barry, but we do have to look at it that way.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there are certainly there are benefits in terms of information sharing. We've seen it through Project Protect. The information shared was around indicators of crimes related to human trafficking, for example. We've done it with Project Guardian, working with our big banks, working with our credit unions, working with our money services businesses to look at the trafficking of fentanyl and financial transactions related to that. We've worked with them to develop and provide indicators to them. We've seen the benefits. We've seen the benefits in enhanced reporting. PEPIDA currently allows the banks to share information related to fraud. I understand that the committee is giving consideration to expanding that from fraud to financial crimes. Certainly, there would be some benefit. We've heard from the banks. We're continuing to work and to study this issue with them in terms of what is, as Madam Saman mentioned, what is the sweet spot, and where is the protection of privacy versus protection of the economic system versus preventing, detecting, identifying money laundering and particularly terrorist financing. So there is some work that continues to be required on that, but I think it is an avenue that requires some very informed and dedicated work.
Okay, Mr. Graywall, I guess I have Mr. Graywall. Is there any others? Did you want anything in, Mr. Dussel, for a little one, Mr. Graywall? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming today. I want to pick up on the questioning on compliance by financial institutions. And another question I had was, in terms of anti-money laundering investigations, how many of them actually lead to charges per year, and do we keep that type of data?
Well, from FINTRAC's perspective, as you know, we provide intelligence to law enforcement, national security, and it's up to them to do. Many of the investigations are on the predicate offense to money laundering, and there are, if we look at StatsCan, lots of arrests, lots of charges every year. How many money laundering charges at the end has been an area of criticism in terms of Canada's regime. And then that would be, I think, something that would be more appropriately answered by either our law enforcement or our public prosecution services as opposed to FINTRAC. The requests for assistance in terms of voluntary information records that come into FINTRAC and the type of assistance that we provide law enforcement, those requests are continuously increasing year over year. So that would suggest that the intelligence that we're providing is in high demand and is quite useful, quite actionable. And we've seen that. So when we help stop a human trafficker by providing financial intelligence, is there a charge of money laundering at the end of that? There may be, there may not be. And as you know, it's often pursued after the conviction for the predicate offense. So it's hard to say, and we do not track, obviously, we provide intelligence, so we can't say one disclosure from FINTRAC leads to one. We're just a piece of the investigation, and we're a piece of the intelligence that we provide to our law enforcement and national security partners.
Yeah, so I actually have a personal example when it comes to regulation. Because we're elected officials, we fall under the PIP legislation. I had just recently got engaged, and my fiance, who works at a financial institution, made me get a bank account at that financial institution. And what basically happened is
It's just starting.
Downhill.
it's in the public record now, so I'm sure she has nothing better to do than Google. But what I said is that, so she made, so we're obviously getting married this summer, and she had to pay a vendor in India because that's where she bought her traditional outfits from. And it got flagged. It got flagged because it was a transaction that was a wire transfer to India, and it wasn't a big amount. It was like $5,000, and it got flagged, and she had to answer a bunch of questions on it. And she was asking me, like, she was a little bit annoyed for having to do that, and she was asking me why, and I was like, and I called back to like, oh, it's probably because she's flagged as somebody that's close to a PIP. And I felt like that's a over regulation in a certain extent, because that just there's a privacy concern as well there, that where's the balance between stopping anti-terrorism funding and somebody being able to shop for their wedding. I think that's a huge spectrum in between.
Yeah. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I hope it was just opening the bank account that we won't go there. You're right. You're all PEPs, as is Ms. Mann, as I am actually as well. It simply means that when you're a PEP, it simply means that when the bank account's being opened by any institution, credit union or otherwise, that they have to do ask a few more questions in terms of source of funds, source of wealth, those kinds of things, and then determine the risks. They do that with all clients. It's just that with PEPs, there's an added understanding of who the person is and the potential for corruption, potential for access to public funds, corruption, those kinds of things, and it applies to foreign PEPs as well as domestic PEPs. The concept of the electronic fund transfer being flagged, I didn't hear you say it was stopped. Questions were raised, but it was not likely because she was a PEP. It was probably more likely the area where the money was going and the fact that it was an unusual transaction for her. So if it's not her normal course of business to send money home, for example, to India, and she's doing this on a monthly basis, there probably likely wouldn't have been any questions. The fact that it was unusual, it was new, it was like, oh, what's going on? Oh, well, I'm getting married, I'm buying a dress, great. So the next time you send the additional money, because for $5,000 she may or may not have gotten the dress, it may have been a down payment, I don't know. But if she has to send more money to pay the balance, it likely wouldn't be flagged. And being flagged at the bank doesn't necessarily mean it's flagged and sent to FINTRAC, and all your $10,000 or more electronic funds sent anywhere out of Canada or coming into Canada, those reports will automatically be sent to FINTRAC. And again, when we
happen per day, I can only imagine it's in the thousands.
Per day, over 10,000. I'd have to take 19 million in my head. We get about 19 million a year.
So 19 million a year. So what's the process at FINTRAC to identify what ones are worth investigation and what aren't? Like 19 million transactions is a lot of transactions. Like the $10,000 transaction could be just as bad as the $1.1 million transaction, right? So do you guys have the resources to actually, deep dive into 19 million transactions? Or is this just like, okay, here's a requirement to flag it so the banks are covered and they say, listen, we sent it to FINTRAC, but is FINTRAC able to do their job?
Yes, the short answer, quite well. I mean, we did well over 2,000 disclosures last year. Do we examine every electronic fund transfer that comes into FINTRAC? No. And those that we do not disclose after 10 years are segregated and disposed of. The issue is we won't know right away whether or not that transaction that came in is something that's worth developing actionable intelligence. So we use that as one piece of the intelligence picture that we put together for law enforcement or national security or international. So we may have an electronic fund transfer or a number of them sitting in our data bank, and it's not an issue in Canada for that person, but somebody from another country is actually looking at that person for potential money laundering.
You're saying electronic fund transfer. That's $10,000 or more sent by a wire transfer in or out of this country. So what if it's a cash transaction or a certified check that's being withdrawn? Is that exact same thing? So like if I'm buying a car and I take a certified check from my bank account, does that get sent to FINTRAC as well?
No, it's large cash transactions of $10,000 or above within 24 hours. So the multiple $5,000 in 2 days within 24 hours, those would get reported. Electronic fund transfers, it's all automatically, any electronic fund transfers 10,000 or more within 24 hours. And we also have suspicious transactions, which could be a $2 transaction if it's suspicious, that would also get reported to FINTRAC.
We're well over Mr. Graywall. Mr. Dussault.
Oui, j'aurais peut-être deux questions.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, which entity has the most trouble complying at the moment? Do you assess entity performance, or do banks do best because they have the infrastructure? What entities have the most trouble being in compliance at the moment? I believe that there are some problems and challenges in all sectors. So I can't say it's credit union because we've had to review one that had problems while others don't. The same thing applies to banks, to real estate, property. The sectors aren't that different in this respect. I can't say that one has significantly more problems than another. Perhaps some reporting entities in some sectors have more problems than other reporting entities in the same or other sectors. It's not a sector that's problematic as such. My other question is on the partnership with the CBSA to to address tax evasion, tax avoidance. The Minister of Revenue said that analyzing billions of transactions of $10,000 or over with suspect countries. Is that in partnership with FINTRAC? How does it work? How do they get information? How does CRA get its information? Is the system appropriate? How can CRA get more information to help address tax evasion? Are there transactions that are particularly frequent with countries that have lower tax rates? Yes, we work very closely with the Canada Revenue Agency. Initially, we help them establish the system through which they receive data. So $10,000 plus transactions come through, well, the information on them comes through the same system we use. We probably receive more data than CRA with regard to suspect transactions, and we work closely with them. We receive voluntary reports. If they're conducting investigations, they can ask us. We can share information and intelligence with them, and we regularly do. We're also working with a series of forums. We're working on how to develop indicators for tax evasion associated with money laundering. We share information in that regard with them as well, when there are investigations underway, especially.
Chair, this has actually been a very good meeting this morning, and thank you for all your commentary thus far. I do wish to ask on the severity of the transactions when they're looked at with the information technology out there. If we can do a better job, and this is also going to Mr. Albas's comment on the transactional burden on entities, especially smaller, say, credit unions or so forth, because sometimes I think in society we're getting to a point where bigger is always better, it seems, or it's not really bigger is always better, it's only bigger that can only handle the administrative burden. And then we're not going to get those small banks that are founded at one time and can grow into larger institutions, or smaller credit unions that can grow into larger institutions. And I wanted to get some color on that front, because I think with the information technology that's out there, and also going to my colleague Mr. Growell's comment about a $10,000 transaction can indicate a much severe, call it washing or whatever term you want to use, versus $1 million transaction. If we can get to a point where businesses will have a less of burdensome and the system's more efficient.
Thank you so much for that question, and that's exactly what we want to work with businesses. As you would have noted, the banking sector, the major reporter sector actually has put in a lot of these systems in place. So a lot of the reports that we get, whether it be the large cash transactions, they're automatic. So they just happen automatically, so there is a lot less of a burden. How is it that we can work with the smaller guys to figure out how is it that we can do something similar for them that it will be a lot less burden is an area that we're very interested in. I mentioned earlier that we are also developing a new analytics modernization system. With that system that should be implemented later on this year, it will actually enable us higher quality and more effective and timely responses to our law enforcement partners as well, in terms of being able to provide actionable reports as well. So we are using technology. We will continue to use technology, but we also need to work with the reporting entities, because some of the smaller people, and you know, when the honourable member mentioned about, you know, the jewelry store, they might not have the same technology as others. So we need to find a way to be able to work with the technology based on the capacity of each of our reporting entities that we work with. So there will be a number of tools we will have to look for.
Okay. And just one quick follow-up, Chair. In terms of sharing best practices between FINTRAC, do you have a quick view in terms of how we are with our international partners? If you can comment on that.
Again, thank you very much. Yes, we work very closely with our international partners, and we share best practices all the time. As a matter of fact, we are looked at as one of the best financial intelligence units worldwide. So many times people come to us for the best practices. Project Protect, which Mr. McKillop identified, as well as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it is a private-public partnership that, together with the banking institutions, with money service bureaus, with our law enforcement, we were able to deal with some very horrid circumstances for Canadian women in the human trafficking area. We are now working on Project Guardian, which aims to deal with trafficking of fentanyl, which is a very serious problem as well. People are actually asking us to go around the world to explain the process, how it worked, because of the results that we've received. Also, the analytics system that we've received, again, we got that as a best practice from one of our international partners, and we've enhanced it. And now we've got other international partners coming to us to say, can we take a look at your analytics system? So anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing is a fight worldwide, and so we work very collaboratively internationally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I just guess as a final question, is there any top-of-mind recommendations that you think the committee should consider in terms of our money laundering proceeds of crime review?
I don't have anything top of mind, but I do want to thank the committee. I think the work you're doing and the amount of witnesses that you're speaking to is very heartwarming for us. We want to hear your recommendations. We want to know what your thoughts are. And I believe that a lot of our ideas are also out in the report that Finance has put out. So the comments coming back from that will inform us quite a bit. But going to some of the comments, I do believe that even with new regulatory requirements or legislative requirements, we do have to balance the requirement to get that data with the administrative burden, and that's something we're very cognizant of and very cautious of. So your ability to look at the two sides of of burden, and I know you're very concerned about it, is very welcomed. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just for committee members' interests, back to regular schedule next week, which people will welcome. Monday, Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, and Wednesday, the final witnesses on this study before we do our travel on this study. And for people to think about for the Wednesday meeting, we need to finalize the budget for pre-budget consultations in the fall, and we need to determine a theme that we would put out in June for people to consider on pre-budget consultations. So if people want to think about that between now and the Wednesday meeting, we have to have our budget in by next Friday, so that work's being worked on. So with that, thank you very much, Ms. Seaman, Mr. McKillop, and Mr. Boudreau. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
you.